You ready to do it?
Wait till. Whenever. Hey. I'm gonna put that in there. There we go. Whoop. I feel like that's me.
Do you notice that?
Is that me over here? Hi, everybody. There's an internet feedback. It's delicious. It's good for your ears.
A little foreboding that Bodhi's sitting right in the
1, 2, 5. 1, 2, 3.
What's he gonna pull?
Something dangerous.
Right?
1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8. Perfect. Great. All right, everybody. Well, welcome. Thanks for coming. Thanks for stopping by here. This is a VoIP panel, so I think we up on stage here we have some of the leaders of the largest open source VoIP projects on planet Earth. I know we're excited to have them up here to talk about it. Yes, Mike? Yeah. So we're going to go through them kind of one by one. They can introduce themselves and describe their projects briefly, so for those of you who don't know who they are or exactly what they represent in their given projects. And then from there, we'll take some questions and kind of have a discussion on the state of VoIP sort of overall in the industry, and maybe how it relates to WebRTC a little bit, the differences inherent maybe in just the actual voice communication IP part of it, maybe a little IoT, and yeah, we'll see what kind of fun stuff we can get out. So why don't you get started?
Sure. I'm Mike Jerris. I'm one of the founders of the FreeSwitch project, and I've been involved since day one, I guess for about 14 years roughly now.
Mm-hmm.
Been there the whole time, do a bunch of coding, used to be responsible for the Windows build system. We've passed that on to some others now. But also all the build things, quite a bit in the Sophia SIP stacks, and media things, all around coder in the project, and happy to be here.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Danielle-Constantin Mierla. I'm one of the initial developers for what was called at that moment SIP Express router, which over the years ended up as a Camaillio project. So it's the one that I'm representing now and somehow leading the development as well as the management of the project. Probably most of you are familiar with what Camaillio is now, a proxy like SIP server, so targeting high capacity SIP routing, working very well with other left and right FreeSwitch Asterisk and other SIP servers out there, Drachio and so on. So I've been in the probably like 16 years or so dealing mainly with SIP signaling, and I led the media processing for previous and the next speaker.
All right, my name is Matt Fredrickson, and I'm here representing the Asterisk project. I've been involved with it since 2001, and that was kind of my baptism by fire into open source telephony as well. Let's see, I've worked on, I'm a lover of everything dead telephony, but over the years I'm slowly starting to appreciate new telephony as well. And by new, I mean SIP. So it's not that new. So I did a lot of work at Digium on its hardware products. So I did a lot of drivers for line cards. I did maintain the ISDN stack for a long time, maintained the Dottie project for a very long time. I wrote an SS7 stack for Asterisk that's used in lots of different places all over the world. It does still exist for those of you that may or may not believe that, but and of late I've been trying to get my SIP chops in order because that's a very, very widely used interface within Asterisk, and so I've been spending a lot more time in SIP land. And last few years before this, I spent building out WebRTC related technologies at Digium. Actually worked with Dan Jenkins on that, and so got an appreciation for some of the new things that they're doing in browser land. So a few years ago, they asked me to step in to take Matt Jordan's old place as he moved up to CTO. And so now I get to do project lead related things for Asterisk, and that's been a fun new adventure. So that's it for me. Go.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Răzvan Crainea, and I'm representing the OpenSeeds project. I've been with the OpenSeeds project for over 8 years. I joined the project in 2010. And ever since I've been working and developing stuff around OpenSIPs. Not sure, probably most of you know what OpenSIPs is. It's a SIPs server and proxy that is targeting high capacity platforms and basically interconnecting high capacity SIP servers. It's based on, mainly on SIP. We don't do media either, but we've got these guys that are doing it pretty well, so we don't need to.
Well, thanks, guys. Did it go off? There we go. Thanks, guys. Appreciate that. So, I think, there we go. So, let's start. This is going to work, I promise. This is not me. Hold on. There we go. All right, I'm just going to hold this. I'm just going to hold it. There it is. Very still. So, anyway, let's just keep this going, and we'll say some. Let's just start talking for a minute about how much of your work these days really involves VoIP over working with WebRTC. Like, what would you say the amount of time you spend on a given week? I know WebRTC is kind of the hot thing right now. We all have a lot to do with that as well. But, you know, traditional SIP interconnects and that kind of thing. What would you say, like, the percentage of the actual work you have to do or that you see out in your daily life has to do with, like, traditional SIP, VoIP telephony?
I mean, I guess I'd start with, it's almost a distinction without a difference. SIP is a signaling protocol. WebRTC is a definition of a media transport, which is based on RTP and SRTP and some other things, and the steps between the two are quite small. So when it comes down to the technology, there's actually very few differences, to the point where, from my experience, it's not that different. Now, on the other side, on the end user side, it's a completely different world. I'd say a good 40% of my work, without digging in, I don't know whether it's a SIP call or a WebRTC call, because it doesn't actually matter. And the other bits, I'd say the WebRTC stuff is growing and is slightly less than the traditional voice over IP stuff, but in the vast majority of things, it's the applications that matter, and the WebRTC is just an endpoint that's delivered to something. Now,
well, that's a good question, though. Like you're saying, the applications are what matter. So have you seen out there people building applications now using different signaling mechanisms, or are they using SIP and trying to interconnect with that? Like, what have we been seeing in the wild, for those of you who've been...
So, yeah, actually, I saw there are a couple of phases, actually, I had with some of the guys that chat during the lunch. So, for prototyping or like just saying it's working, a lot of companies are going with some, let's say, JSON-based signaling. There are a couple of Node.js kind of packages that they could reuse, or JavaScript libraries for that. And that's like working well. WebRTC, it's great. Like 1 hour and I have calls between whatever system I put in place to browser and a Node.js server. But then when they start and look at, okay, how I do now call on hold or call transfer or so, then I keep starting adding to the JSON and so, and then end up like, okay, this kind of looks like SIP with a lot of
with curly brackets around.
curly brackets and a lot of like double quotes around all header names and so on. So a matter of actually the target, I've seen like, okay, they prototype something easily with JSON because it's easy for JavaScript developers, but then when the business case catch the development team and say, okay, we need to interconnect a bit with the old network, and then like maybe it's like I don't know, call center agent and wants to put it on hold or so, or even transfer it to someone else, the JSON is still limited, and then they kind of reinvent the wheel. Of course, could be a bit more optimized for that use case, but if you really want to replace like telephony behavior, I have seen a couple of companies that they went to SIP. There are a couple of JavaScript good SIP libraries around, including JSIP with Iñaki. It's around, one of the developers. So some of them started with some proprietary and end up with SIP, or they ended up with something also similar complexity.
Matt, is that kind of why you guys chose SIP over WebSockets for Asterisk 15 and that sort of?
Yeah, well, you know, there are actually a couple different things we attempted. You know, I mentioned I was involved with some WebRTC related initiatives with Dan a few years ago. And actually we built out a channel driver for that infrastructure to work with and things like that. And we thought, at the time, we thought that we were really smart at the very beginning. We were like, well, you know, we need to ditch all this legacy telephony stuff, right? And we need to make a lighter signaling protocol. But it's funny how Daniel mentioned it, it came to pass. As business cases came up, it's exactly what happened is, you know, all the things that you thought you were going to not have to do, you know, all the overhead associated with doing full SIP, you realized there were use cases where you wanted those things, and you ended up actually reinventing the protocol from scratch. And so, you know, in terms of like how we've, from an Asterisk perspective and public interface perspective, how we've chosen to support SIP as the interop protocol with it. I think that was a good idea, and I think that probably will remain a good idea for a long time. Because I mean, really, what is WebRTC in terms of signaling protocol? People say there's no signaling protocol, but there kind of is, right? Yeah. But it's a fancy way of exchanging an offer answer, right? That's all it is. And so you just need some kind of mechanism for, you know, propagating the information. And for, you know, for many business cases and use cases, SIP's a great way to do that. And Iñaki and other people make great SIP stacks for browsers, and you know, there's a lot of power in supporting that ecosystem.
Yeah, so I'll have to agree with all of you because, well, basically, actually I'm in the favor of standards. When I want to do something, I usually try to see what other solutions are and how they've done it. And they most likely have done it better than I would do in short term. So that's why I'd rather use SIP, because SIP, well, is widely used and in my opinion, it's the best way to go rather than reinvent the wheel each time you want to do something.
Yeah, you make a good point. I mean, you make a good point about that being standards-based and how important that is. And just like the generic importance of having something as a reference we can all use, right? And that's been around for a while. And you know, a lot of those were experts in SIP and are. Back on again. Yeah, there one too. Nope. So they. I mean, it's an important part to bring in. We all know the SIP protocol backwards and forwards. We have a lot of infrastructure built up that can actually handle it at scale, things like that, right? So there's no reason to throw that all away. What would you say, like looking forward a little bit, particularly in like the VoIP world, are there any big things coming down the line? I mean, like, you know, some like different. I mean, Opus was a big shift, right? This was some codecs world. There's some shifts in like, you know, different ways to handle error correction of the like lossy connections on mobile, stuff like that. Do you guys see anything kind of coming down the pipe that you think is really exciting, particularly in the audio-only sphere?
Oh man, why did you have to stipulate audio only?
Yeah.
I mean,
It could be video, but we'll talk about audio.
I think the answer is there's not anything particularly interesting in audio or video. I mean, like, there's little bits in video and that, but the interesting things that are coming down the pike are people in the browser. We have an opportunity to interact with people in a different way, and that's, I mean, we've had video phones, we've had audio phones before, but what we haven't had is a single platform that's on you know, billions of devices in the world that easily gives you access to audio and video and screen sharing and other sort of real-time data interactions and all these things all at the same time in an easy-to-use way. And that's like the conversation about SIP standards and that working really well definitely holds true until you try to do something that's a more creative, integrated thing where all of these things interact at the same time. And that's something that SIP hasn't been well suited for, as far as integrating data that has to do with what you're doing at the same time. There's certainly ways to do it, but a more integrated approach that lets you merge all of those things together, that understands the state of all of these pieces together, is something that is missing from SIP. And those are the kind of things, and you know, I don't know the specifics. I've certainly seen some creative things, but I think that's where WebRTC really is a game changer. Other than, you know, other than a really accessible soft phone, that's where you're going to see actual innovation in the next few years.
We have to go to HTTP because now they try to do everything over HTTP, including the DNS. So we'll see SIP over HTTP soon, so we can integrate.
Yeah, or, I mean, it's already SIP over WebSockets, right? So,
Yeah.
so extensions for those sorts of things are obviously going to be there.
Yeah, no, I mean, at the end, SIP is supposed to be extensible, and I agree with you that it lacks a lot of this interaction with new kind of, or extension for the new kind of services. But at the end, you know, either you do it on HTTP or you do it on SIP. Nobody prevents on using a new method to extend SIP and then say this is for advertising, screen sharing, or a whiteboard event or something like that, or do they use existing one and then eventually propose it? Because at the end, if you look, the web world is practically they agree on this transport layer, how we carry headers and so on, how we put the body there, but then it's up to you to put the content there.
Yep.
So also with SIP, nobody says that you have to carry only SDP, the ugly SDP, or only XML. You can carry something else for your service. Because, okay, I'm only signaling guys, I see SIP from that point of view. It's what I see the benefit of it is this infrastructure for routing a lot of messages left and right, knowing the path and going back in the same way or failing over another, it's there. So, because if you look at all these guys, like big internet companies like Google or Facebook, what they did, they actually implemented a very good infrastructure. And you see a lot of talks from their team about how they build this cloud and so on, because web was there, Apache was there, or nginx. All the other technologies they use were available, only the capacity of scaling, but they had the financial power to do it. So now if we invent a new protocol, we have also to make the new infrastructure for it in one way or another. So I agree that now a lot of apps actually combine couple of protocols. Typically it's SIP and HTTP. It's used a lot for authentication to the service or getting updates on the app and so on.
Well, does anybody have any questions right now for these guys? We have leaders of these projects up here, so now's the time to fire away if you have any questions for them. We'll keep chatting about other things. Well, Matt, let's go back then to what we were saying about video. Let's see if not audio doesn't excite you. You know, as an old school telephony guy, I sort of assumed that audio would really get your motor running, but video is the new school thing. What's cool? What are you excited about?
Well, you know, it's kind of interesting. I had my own personal conversion to video a number of years ago because I was a staunch anti-video advocate for a very long time. You know, because my perspective was probably like many of yours was, you know, you don't want to see everything that everybody's doing all the time, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to see if you're like scratching your arm or whatever, or doing anything else embarrassing while you're sitting on a conference call, right? Because you know there's like a natural concealment that comes with audio and audio-only communication, right? But as I started working on some of the new WebRTC related initiatives at Digium and started using video more, I realized that there was an incredible amount of power in a level of personal communication that didn't exist with audio, and I turned completely around with regards to my opinion about it, and now I prefer a video type communication over audio, which really surprised me. I didn't realize that I would have such a staunch turnaround in terms of my own opinions about it.
I think it's important to recognize, though, like you said, like their personal change in that is something I think that maybe the consumers and application users see before we do as the engineers, right? They see that power, they use it, they're like, oh yeah, I've got to do it with my friends. And we as the engineers are like, really, you'd rather do that? Like,
yep.
And then we have to optimize our side to handle that.
Well, and if you look at like kids and things like that, they're growing up in this world where they have the opportunity to go video first in terms of communication, right? Like FaceTime and things like that have come out. And so instead of it being this extra thing, for them that's the normal thing, right? And you see that in their behavior and actions. Like they'll just sit there on a call, like with their friends. And I've heard stories of friends with their kids, and they'll just sit on a call with a friend for hours, and they won't necessarily be talking or whatever, but they'll just kind of be there with them. They'll have a video call up or whatever, and they'll be around, and sometimes they'll come over, and the kind of persistent, high, intimate, high-level communication, right, is available and is being used in ways that probably we would not have communicated previously without that type of accessibility. So I think the impact on making video accessible to the common man is probably one of the biggest new swings in terms of the market and in terms of the technologies that are available right now. Now, obviously, you can take that to the next level, because there's actually interesting talk in the other room, and there's talking about what's the next level of communication, right? And they're talking about how AR, VR is like kind of a next step. And actually, you know, after my own personal turnaround with regard, my conversion, if you might say, with regards to like the power of videos, a very personal form of communication, I could definitely see that happening. But right now, I think we're going through the video revolution, like in terms of like communication paradigms and expectations, and a new level of sort of like communication intimacy that you can have with video involved in that. And so, you know, I think I think there's going to be huge opportunities in terms of video applications and things like that. Most of them are probably going to be driven by browsers, phones, and powerful endpoints and things like that. So.
Yeah, you know, I think that we were saying too about like, you know, the AR and VR sort of being out there in the distance as, you know, very exciting like topics to get to. Like, because we're at the very beginning of this, thinking about how we're going to deploy infrastructure to handle these much higher capacity streams, right? We've gotten pretty good at handling RTP and audio coding and that kind of stuff, but like we're not getting the whole, it's scaling up very, very quickly, you know, and we all know that the video stuff is very much more sensitive to, like you were saying in the talk, packet loss, stuff like that. There's a lot more sensitivity there. A lot more thought has to go into how to build our infrastructure to handle this stuff, knowing that, you know, maybe 5 or 10 years down the line, it might even be 10x what it is now for endpoints. And I think that goes back to the SIP proxy layers as well, where like you guys are really like, you're the first line of defense and like first line of routing, and like usually one of the most high performing pieces of that infrastructure, and used in all sorts of use cases where probably you never really thought it would be when you first got, you know, the projects were first being implemented. Can you talk for a minute about, you know, what you've seen in that proxy layer, like what you've been not forced to do, but asked to do, and like how?
Okay, sure, yes. So I agree that video, we have a video revolution right now, and having WebRTC brings video and audio very accessible to everyone. But in order to support all these, we need to, as Daniel said, we need to rethink our infrastructure. But not only that. For example, having more people using this kind of services imply that we have more. We also have to take into account something. What is it called? Security perspective. Right? We have to look into fraud detection, because having people having more accessibility to these kind of services will engage more people into trying to hack them, trying to get more out of it. And being at the beginning, all we can do is try to foresee this kind of bad signs and try to solve them one way or another. Yeah, so for now, what we can do is we can just simply sit and see what's going on or how it will go. We just need to foresee how this will go and how we can prevent it from happening. And I've seen a couple of talks here about this, and I think it's a good starting point to what we'll be doing from now on.
Yeah, I think that, you know, I think anyone who was here earlier for Al's talk from Facebook about massive scale of Facebook Messenger and how they're dealing with, you know, that sort of incredible worldwide global phenomenon they have to kind of deal with, shows you the scale that business could reach very rapidly, right? It's not unheard of that something developed on Asterisk or FreeSwitch could, you know, and then, you know, Camilio or OpenSIPs could suddenly explode to 100 million users within 6 months or a year. Like, that's not inconceivable these days. So having to deal with that and the fraud that comes along with that, and like, you know, attacks, everything else is something that has to be almost thought about now if you're trying to launch something that you think will go viral from the outset. Because by the time it gets to it, you have the Pokemon Go style phenomenon where it gets too popular too fast and the service starts crashing and, you know, your consumers get upset. So that's interesting to think about, because it really does require all those pieces together. Daniel, talk for a minute about like how I know Campanile is now used so heavily in like IMS applications as well, right? It sort of has become like the kind of de facto core for a lot of these things. How did that come about? Like what was the like when did you start? When did the project start to have all those modules added in and like? Tell us a little about that.
Yeah, so practically comes from the origin of the project, which I mentioned. It was a SIP Express router. The project started in 2001 at the Fraunhofer Focus Institute in Berlin, which is like a co-organizer for our Camaillio World Conference. So we are still working together closely. As SIP Express router became popular by 2004-2005, they sold IPR to a US company, Tekelec, which meanwhile was acquired by Oracle. And a division of the institute, as the institute couldn't continue on just pure VoIP at that moment, started to look into this mobile networks, IMS. So they created what was called OpenIMS Core project. So some of us left the institute, started to do consultancy for Camaillio SIP Express router on the classic telephony kind of services. And some of them stayed in the research institute and they started to look into this next generation mobile networks. And it was like an independent project for a couple of years by Dragoș Vingorzan, another developer from the institute, which later, with the help of Karsten Bock and a lot of work from some guys from South Africa, the Smile Telecom guys, we we adjusted because it was more or less the same foundation, but meanwhile, like Camaillio evolved a lot in terms of other features, and they were kind of based on the old SIP Express router platform. So we adjusted, and by that time we were pretty much, and we are still pretty much the only pure open source IMS voice over LTE platform. There is another project called from Metaswitch, Clear Water, but as I understood, it's in. Yeah, so that's missing some pieces like you need to get some specialized SBCs to make it, which is commercial and so on. And then by the, there was a huge burn by the mobile operators when they bought licenses for 4G, and then it was a second one when they started to buy this IMS solution from the big vendors because they were like buying first pre-IMS to make it a bit easy for migration, then IMS ready, and then another kind of IMS for huge amount of money. And actually they realized that the promise of the IMS of building everything on top of it was not that easy. So practically it was just voice communication. So the profit of buying expensive systems was not profitable. So then open source was a viable solution, at least for prototyping and playing, so you don't have to pay millions for a test bed. You can build it yourself, and then you see, okay, it's working, let's push it a bit farther, let's patch it if it's not working, and then it started, and we have Orange was contributing patches at some point in Poland and other large companies. So again, it's the power of open source. I haven't really work that much on that direction, but because of, it's there, you can play with it at no cost, more or less. Then the only limitation here is device size, client size, because in the way that it's not easy to find devices like mobile phones that you can plug in your own voice over LTE network. It's James' body that helps us now, but forced. So yeah, I think it's a good future for open source in this space of these big mobile operators.
I think that you brought up a good point too, right? Is that like much as Asterisk and FreeSwitch helped, take down the big iron telco switches, you're helping take down sort of the big IMS iron that's there, and you're really disrupting, huge billion-dollar markets with an open source solution that performs, equally, if not better than that already exists. And guys like James who are building their own cell phone networks now are giving the physical footprint to that software that allows all this stuff to tie together. And I think WebRTC, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of interesting too, because it's almost from the bottom up this way. Like, it's not expensive to get started. In fact, it's very easy. It's just a little bit just taken longer, I think, than we would all agree to really like solidify around something that is a, workable standard in all the different browsers. But it's interesting that in this case, we're not forced to buy stuff from Cisco or, Oracle to make the future happen. We're the ones sort of building it from the ground up. And that's sort of a different paradigm, right? It's a bit interesting because we have the top end of very expensive things and then everyone sort of working on the bottom to create the future as it moves forward. So what do you see as like the, I don't know, going down like, 5 years down the line, what do you see as the next steps of like the WebRTC platform, how the projects might start integrating with that more heavily, or like where you think things are going to go, where you might like to see them go yourselves even?
So probably I'm seeing more in the direction of what Mike said before. It's going to be more interactive, the communication. Now it's interactive in the way that we know it with the voice, but practically voice, like WebRTC, in the way of not really running it from the browser, I think is going to take over the old way of like the transport layer and so on because of the security it gives and privacy.
Do you think things like the Electron apps are going to take off even more, like building this stuff into like just shelled containers, the WebRTC runtime, so we can get like just apps that look more like native but are actually built on?
No, I would think we will still have like desk phones. They will not die because a lot of people love them. They'll just run there the same kind of technology like, DTLS, SRTP because it's more secure. Just run maybe SIP over WebSockets because it's more scalable than over plain TCP in the way that they do framing and this is the SIP message. I read it at once. I don't have to do parsing one by one character to see content length, end of the headers, and then take the body, and now I finish the SIP message. So WebSocket brings a bit in terms of more structured communication. It's easy to see issues or read at once and separate frames. So I think over the time, all the new devices will go this way around. So from this perspective, is the benefit. And then you have the classic needs of business, maybe just calling or answering calls, and then more interactive in the way that so far was more like IVR, which typically didn't work. Now you have desktop phones with touch screen, which gives you now a bit more interactivity. So probably in the future will be just a tablet with a hook or something like that. So I think this would be the next step where we get more interactivity between client side and server side. And actually this is going to create a pressure on the signaling because a lot of these events I think will be done through some signaling layer. So I don't know, maybe update info, signaling I did this event on my screen. Could you eventually update the other side or switch to record now and things like that before we use *6 for Asterisk or what's that, start recording and things like that. So probably it will be a pressure a bit more in the signaling plane, but we will have to see how this evolves over the time.
I think that a lot of the potential, I think that the stage has been set as far as technology goes. So what's happened is like all these things that used to be really expensive and really hard to do, and you had to go to these really big companies that kept them secret, deep and dark in their bellies, right? The thing that really they took all the hard parts of building good, like soft phones, for example, like building a good echo canceller and things like that, and they gave it away for free, like in the browser, right? Or building good video encoders and decoders and things like that. They gave that away for free. Or like the technology to do good packet loss concealment, things like that, in adverse network environments. Like they gave it away for free, so that so the stage has been set on the client side, and then you've got really great options as far as like video conferencing, manipulation things. Like you got like Janus, you got Jitsi, you have Asterisk now, and you have all these other, you have FreeSwitch, you've got all these great, you have this awesome set of tools for application developers to use and totally put the take away the hard problems and let the application developers have their freedom as far as like, being creative, building things that you didn't anticipate. I think that's where I see the market going in the next 5 years or so. Like, obviously, there's going to be iterative changes, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to have things like, you know, we're going to move forward to, you know, better bitrate codecs, like VP9 or whatever, or,
Yeah.
you know, VP10 or whatever, you know, however the future plays out as far as those things go. But the technology space, the technology stage has been set for, you know, this really big, huge world of web developers, which, you know, is vastly larger than the telecommunications world and the people that play in this domain of real-time, you know, packets and signaling and things like that, and allows all those it harnesses the power of all those millions and millions of brains to be able to use their creativity to build things that you had not anticipated before. And so I suspect, you know, a lot of us are going to be building blocks in that environment.
Cool. Yeah, great. Just a quick hand raise. Who actually has a desk phone at their office right now? Who actually uses a desk phone? See, it's still.
I have more.
Yeah, right. It's actually that was only like maybe 65% of the room. So you know, not a lot. I don't. I only use soft phones, and I actually only use WebRTC calling at this point. But I mean, it is changing. Like things, you know, this was something. This is the world is shifting quickly, and so I think it's exciting to be a part of that. Let's check again. Any questions? Anybody? Anything out there? All right, let's check the time real fast. Yes.
Yeah, let me ask here. So for each one of your individual projects, I know we've talked a lot about the future, but what would you personally like to see evolve in the project, and what do you think, like, and how do you think that would be adopted by the consumer markets, and you know, that type of stuff?
Oh God, what do I want to see evolve? One of the things that I think that we've maybe not delivered on over the years and that I really want to see evolve is accessibility of the technology. Like all of these technologies, like we commoditize them for, you know, integrators who really dig in and do all the hard work and this and that, but it's still not like easy for, you know, your web coders and stuff like that to get in and dig into what those features are. And like I was saying earlier about, I think the applications of the future are not going to look like phone calls, but they're going to integrate voice and video and web things, you know, all together. You may be taking your driving test and it's actually a video screen that's playing videos to you with buttons overlaid, that's doing speech detection, that also has the camera on, that's doing eye tracking to understand, you know, in doing voice stress analysis, all at the same time to get a full picture of whether this truck driver really understands the material and whether they can do it. Those are the kinds of technologies you're going to see, and I think what all of us have right now is still not very well suited for these really complex integrated technologies. I mean, we all kind of have parts of the building blocks together, but it's not really well exposed for the kind of applications we haven't anticipated yet, and I think that's the kind of things that I'd like to do, and I think that we'll see in the next few years.
Yeah, so I would extend, because it would be not only my project, but it would be the entire ecosystem.
Yeah.
As also, we had the example that technology stage is set. So as I'm no longer that young, and I still have a bit of experience like doing some like web programming pre-PHP time, when you had this CGI on C, like C, right? So we are kind of at that stage, right? Because we do a lot of like manually and you have to code it. My hope is that soon, in a couple of years, we'll have kind of higher level APIs that somehow doesn't really care about what's under hood. And yeah, I want to add an overlay for whatever, putting mustache or whatsoever is not gonna require whatever complex. So like, to be honest, the web development was really pushed ahead a lot by the PHP and the simplicity of that. And they didn't care about the protocol, they didn't care about what the heck it's Linux or whatsoever running Windows and so on. So eventually, we'll kind of emerge into this kind of higher level APIs. Probably first would be in the client side. We have very good JavaScript libraries, but some people are still complaining, you know, it's JavaScript, but you still need to know C. Now, using a different signaling protocols, JSON and so on, will still require those guys to know, oh, I need to advertise ringing state or on hold or muted or so on. Is SIP or not SIP or I don't know what signaling protocol, they still need to know like telephony technology, which is actually the hard part. So hopefully it will be simplified somehow by new guys coming and adding a layer on top of the JSIP or on top of some application here, and it will be kind of unified language that people could build on it. Hopefully, I will see. I think the sad part in our business is that we have a couple of organizations out there that kind of pretend they work together and collaborate, but actually they compete. I'm referring here to like ITU, ETSI, and GSMA, that they kind of, ITF came with the SIP simple, okay, bad name, but then the GSMA came with the extensions to that, messing up even worse, not collaborating. And then the ITU was like saying, oh, Opus, we don't really kind of care, or GSMA said, let's use AMR, which is a good one, but at least say use also Opus, because it's at least free and interoperates. We don't need to do transcoding. So, you know, this is, at least in the web world, you had the W3C that was kind of a single entity, and then on the IP world was like ITF, so kind of a single head, still having some fights when it was the WebRTC on also this DCMA discussions, but at least not so many heads on different, like ETSI, ITU, GSMA, then it was Open Mobile Alliance, so everyone was kind of trying to make its own standardization group and pretending we collaborate, but actually we try to have some patents that we will do it and we'll squeeze money from you. So they look at a different business model. In the world is like, let it free the API, let the business be on creativity.
Right. Yeah.
On the telephony, the business model of these companies that have control, it's on the like technology itself at the low layer, like patents everywhere.
Great.
It's a good answer, Daniel.
Yeah, it was a good answer. Yeah, Daniel kind of covered it.
Yeah. I mean, I would say from an Asterisk project perspective, what is the future in the next 5 years entail for us? And I think a lot of it is exactly what Michael and Daniel already talked about. It's like, it's exposing things. So we kind of already set, well, you know, we've had a lot of ways of exposing programmatically interface with an Asterisk, but, you know, a few years ago we added the REST interface to modernize, to provide a more modern, more familiar interface to the web development world, to Asterisk. I think that it's about exposing things, as Daniel mentioned, at a level that your vast user base wants to work at, right? And I think that for our project, it's continuing to support those interfaces, evaluating whether or not they're still relevant in technology landscape that exists for the user base that want to build applications on top of Asterisk or you know, other telephony engines. And then, you know, if there's something more relevant or a higher level that we should be working at, then moving towards that interface so that it's accessible to those people. So that's kind of see where things go with that. And then maintain yourself as far as market, you know, being able to match technology space in the market too, right? Because, you know, when you're talking about media engines, you're talking about trying to bridge the gap between high-level developers and low-level technologies, right? And so making sure that you work at both sides of the fence, that's kind of the game that you play. So that's
Awesome.
Okay, so I also definitely agree with you. That's something that we are looking into OpenSIPs as well, in providing a simpler way of using it or accessing the VoIP services. A web developer should not look into, for example, SIP infrastructure. They shouldn't really know how a SIP endpoint or how scalable a specific server should be. All they need to do is send a call over there, and everything should be taken care of by the platform. And that's something that we are working hard to do. supporting all sorts of clustering schemes and stuff like that in order to provide an easier interface towards application developers and phone makers.
Awesome. One more thing. I also want to say, like, this is a perfect time to give a shout out to the esteemed leader of this conference, Dan Jenkins, who lives both in the web world and in the RTC world, and I think he would. Yeah, hi, back there. And I think he sees that simplicity is what we need to get to as well, and is why we're all here to talk about that and make this more of a friendly environment. So, I want to thank you guys for coming up here. Thank you so much for talking about the future and the current state of your projects. Again, we'll see everybody outside at the Hog Roast in a little bit. Go over and talk to Matt and the Matrix track. Talk to you soon.
Just an update, Sweden's reporting.